The telegram arrived on a Tuesday morning in April of 1878, and Martha Reynolds held it in his calloused hands while standing on the porch of his ranch house in Pendleton, Oregon, wondering if he had made the biggest mistake of his life. He had never been good with women, never had the time or the patience for courting, and at 32 years old, he figured a mail-order bride was his best chance at having a family before he was too old to enjoy it. The advertisement he had placed in the Boston newspaper had been simple and direct, much like himself, stating that he owned a profitable cattle ranch and was looking for a hard-working wife who could handle the isolation of frontier life. The woman who had responded called herself Julia Edwards, and her letters had been brief but well-written, suggesting an education that surprised him. She claimed to be 24 years old, unmarried, and eager for a fresh start in the West. Martha had sent her the money for passage, and now she would be arriving on the afternoon stage. He folded the telegram and tucked it into his shirt pocket, then looked out across his land, the rolling hills dotted with cattle, the blue mountains rising in the distance. It was a good life he had built here, carved out of nothing with his own two hands and a stubbornness that had served him well. He went inside to wash up and change into his better shirt, the one without any patches or stains. His reflection in the small mirror above the wash basin showed a man weathered by sun and wind, with dark hair that was starting to show gray at the temples and eyes the color of storm clouds. He was not a handsome man, he knew, but he was honest and hardworking, and he hoped that would be enough for Julia Edwards. The ride into Pendleton took him an hour, and he arrived at the stage depot with 30 minutes to spare. The town was bustling with activity, miners and ranchers and merchants going about their business. He tied his horse outside the depot and went inside to wait, his hat in his hands, feeling more nervous than he cared to admit. The stage arrived in a cloud of dust, the horses snorting and stamping as the driver pulled them to a halt. Martha watched as the door opened and passengers began to disembark. An older couple came first, then a traveling salesman with his cases, and finally a woman in a dark blue traveling dress that had seen better days. She was slender and not very tall, with auburn hair pulled back in a simple bun. Her face was pale and drawn, with shadows under her green eyes that suggested she had not been sleeping well. She clutched a single carpetbag in both hands and looked around with an expression that Martha recognized as fear poorly disguised as composure. He stepped forward, clearing his throat. "Miss Edwards." She turned to face him, and for a moment her eyes went wide like a cornered animal considering flight. Then she seemed to gather herself, squaring her shoulders. "Mr. Reynolds." "Yes, madam. Welcome to Pendleton." He reached for her bag, and she hesitated before letting him take it. "The wagon is just outside. We have about an hour's ride to the ranch." She nodded but did not speak, and they walked together to where he had left his horse and wagon. He helped her up onto the seat, noting how her hands were shaking despite her attempts to hide it. As they left town, heading east toward his ranch, Martha tried to make conversation. "The journey was not too difficult, I hope." "It was long," she said quietly. Her voice was soft, with an accent that marked her as educated, someone who had grown up with money and refinement. It made him wonder all the more why she had answered his advertisement. "Oregon is different from Boston," he said. "More open. Some folks find it lonely." "I am accustomed to being alone," she replied, and there was something in her tone that discouraged further questions. They rode in silence for a while, the only sounds the creak of the wagon and the clip-clop of the horses' hooves. Martha pointed out landmarks as they passed them, the creek where he got his water, the stand of pines that marked the eastern boundary of his property, the hill where you could see for miles on a clear day. Julia listened but did not comment, her hands folded tightly in her lap, her eyes constantly scanning the horizon as if she expected trouble to appear at any moment. The ranch house came into view as they crested a rise, a solid timber structure with a stone chimney and a wide porch. It was not fancy, but it was well built and comfortable, larger than most homesteads in the area. Behind it stood the barn and corrals, and beyond that, the grazing land stretched out toward the mountains. "This is it," Martha said, pulling the wagon to a stop in front of the house. "It is not much, but it is home." Julia looked at the house for a long moment, and he saw her throat move as she swallowed. "It is very nice," she said, though her voice sounded strained. He helped her down from the wagon and carried her bag inside. The main room served as both kitchen and sitting area, with a large stone fireplace on one wall and a table with 4 chairs in the center. 2 doors led off the main room, one to his bedroom and one to a smaller room he had prepared for her. "I figured we would take things slow," Martha said, setting her bag down near the door to the smaller bedroom. "You can have your own room until we have the wedding. Reverend Thompson can come out from town whenever you are ready." Julia turned to look at him, surprise evident on her face. "You would do that?" "Of course," he said, confused by her reaction. "I may not be a gentleman by Boston standards, but I was raised to respect a woman's virtue." For the first time since she had stepped off the stage, something that might have been a smile touched her lips. "Thank you, Mr. Reynolds." "Martha," he said. "You should call me Martha." "Martha," she repeated, and then, hesitantly, "You may call me Julia." Over the next few days they settled into an uneasy routine. Martha rose before dawn to tend to the cattle and the 100 other tasks that running a ranch required. Julia took over the cooking and cleaning, and he had to admit she was a better cook than he had been. She was quiet and kept to herself, rarely speaking unless spoken to. But she worked hard and never complained about the isolation or the primitive conditions compared to what she must have been used to in the city. But Martha could not shake the feeling that something was wrong. She startled at sudden noises, and more than once he caught her staring out the window toward the road, her face tense with worry. She slept poorly. He could hear her pacing in her room late at night. And she had a habit of keeping her carpet bag packed and ready by the door, as if she might need to leave at a moment's notice. On the 5th day, he decided to address it directly. They were sitting at the table after dinner, and he set down his coffee cup and looked at her across the rough-hewn wood. "Julia, I need to ask you something, and I need you to be honest with me." She went very still, her hands frozen around her own cup. "What is it?" "Are you in some kind of trouble?" The color drained from her face. "What makes you ask that?" "You are afraid of something," he said gently. "I have seen men running from the law before, and they have the same look you do, always watching, always ready to run. If you are in trouble, I need to know. I cannot help you if I do not know what is wrong." For a long moment she said nothing, and he thought she might refuse to answer. Then she set down her cup with a hand that trembled and looked directly at him for the first time since she had arrived. "You are right," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "I am running from the law." Martha leaned back in his chair, digesting this information. "What did you do?" "I killed a man," she said, and her voice cracked on the words. "In Boston, 3 months ago." He waited, sensing there was more to the story. Julia wrapped her arms around herself, as if she were cold despite the warmth from the fireplace. "His name was Edgar Thornton. He was a businessman, wealthy and respected, and he was also the man my father had chosen for me to marry." "You did not want to marry him," Martha said, more statement than question. "I did not," she agreed, "but my father needed the money. My family had fallen on hard times, you see, bad investments, gambling debts. Edgar offered to pay everything if I would marry him." She took a shaky breath. I agreed because I thought I had no choice. I thought I could endure it. But then I discovered what kind of man he truly was. What kind of man was that? The kind who beat his first wife to death, Julia said flatly. She supposedly fell down the stairs, but the servants whispered about it. How he had been angry with her that night, how they had heard her screaming. No charges were ever filed, of course. Men like Edgar do not face consequences for their actions. Martha felt his jaw tighten with anger. Go on. The night before our wedding, he came to my father's house. He had been drinking. He wanted to claim his rights early, he said. My father was out and the servants had been given the night off so they would not witness anything untoward. Her voice was shaking now, the words coming faster. He cornered me in the parlor. He tore my dress. He said I was his property now and I had better learn to accept it. What did you do? Martha asked quietly. There was a fireplace poker on the hearth, Julia said, staring down at her hands. When he grabbed me, I hit him with it. I did not mean to kill him. I just wanted him to stop. But he fell and hit his head on the marble mantel, and there was so much blood. He was dead before I could even think about getting help. That was self-defense, Martha said firmly. Any reasonable person would see that. Julia laughed, a bitter sound with no humor in it. Perhaps. But Edgar's family has influence and money. The newspapers painted me as a gold digger who killed him in a fit of rage when he tried to break off our engagement. There was a warrant issued for my murder. I fled before they could arrest me. How did you end up out here? I had a little money saved, enough to get me as far as Philadelphia. I saw your advertisement in a newspaper there and thought the West was far enough that they might never find me. I know it was wrong to deceive you, but I did not know what else to do. She finally looked up at him, her green eyes bright with unshed tears. I am sorry. You did not bargain for this. If you want me to leave, I understand. Martha stood up and walked to the window, looking out at the darkening sky. He had been prepared for many things when he sent for a mail-order bride. A woman who was older than she claimed, or less attractive, or bad-tempered. He had not been prepared for this. But as he thought about what she had told him, what she had endured, he felt not anger but a fierce protectiveness that surprised him. He turned back to face her. You are safe now. Julia stared at him as if she had not heard correctly. What? You are safe, he repeated, crossing back to the table. Nobody is going to take you from here. This is my land and the law in these parts knows me. If anyone comes looking for you, they will have to go through me first. You do not understand, she said urgently. The Thornton family has hired detectives, private investigators who specialize in finding people. They will not stop until they find me. Then we will deal with that when it happens, Martha said calmly. But I am not going to turn you out. What happened to you was not your fault, and I will not let you be punished for defending yourself. Why would you do this for me? Julia asked, her voice breaking. You do not even know me. Martha pulled out his chair and sat back down, choosing his words carefully. Maybe not. But I know what it is like to be desperate and alone. I know what it is like to need help and have nowhere to turn. And I believe you when you say it was self-defense. That counts for something. A tear slid down Julia's cheek, and she quickly wiped it away. Thank you. You cannot know what this means to me. You are welcome, he said gruffly, uncomfortable with her gratitude. But we need to be smart about this. If anyone asks, you have been here for months, not days. We got married last winter. Can you remember that? Yes, she said, nodding quickly. Good. And Julia, he waited until she met his eyes. I meant what I said before about taking things slow. This does not change that. We can have a real marriage when you are ready, not before. You are a good man, Martha Reynolds, she said softly. I am just doing what is right, he replied, standing up. Now get some rest. Tomorrow I will teach you how to shoot. If there is trouble coming, you should know how to defend yourself. The next morning dawned clear and bright, the kind of spring day that made Martha grateful to be alive. He took Julia out behind the barn where he had set up targets and spent 2 hours teaching her how to handle a rifle and a pistol. She was a quick learner, her hands steady despite her nervousness, and by the end of the lesson, she could hit the target more often than not. "Good," he said approvingly. "Keep practicing. If you ever need to use it, you should not have to think about it." "I hope I never do," Julia said, but she held onto the pistol he had given her, checking that it was loaded before tucking it into her pocket. As the days passed, something began to shift between them. Julia started to relax, the constant tension in her shoulders easing bit by bit. She smiled more often, and sometimes he even heard her humming while she worked in the kitchen. She asked questions about the ranch, about his life, and he found himself telling her things he had never told anyone. About how he had come west after the Civil War, broken and aimless, and found purpose in building something with his own hands. About the loneliness that had driven him to place that advertisement, the fear that he would spend his whole life alone. For her part, Julia began to share pieces of her past. The happy childhood before her mother died. Her love of reading and how her father had educated her despite the scandal of a woman being too learned. Her dreams of seeing the world, dreams that had died when her family's fortunes collapsed. "I thought my life was over," she said one evening as they sat on the porch watching the sunset. "I thought I would either marry Edgar and die slowly or refuse and watch my father go to debtor's prison. When I killed him, even though it was an accident, part of me felt free for the first time in years." "You are free now," Martha said. "Truly free. You can be whoever you want to be out here." She turned to look at him, and there was something in her expression that made his heart beat faster. "Who do you think I should be?" "I think you should be yourself," he said honestly. "That is more than enough." A month passed, and then another. The detective Julia feared never materialized, and gradually she began to believe that perhaps she really was safe. She threw herself into life on the ranch with a determination that impressed Martha. She learned to milk the cow, tend the chickens, and even helped him repair fences. She was not as strong as a man, but she was clever and willing, and he found himself looking forward to her company more and more. It was during those long days working side by side that Martha realized he was falling in love with her. It was not a sudden thing, not a bolt of lightning, but a slow and steady growth, like a seed taking root. He loved the way she laughed when one of the chickens did something amusing. He loved how she bit her lip when she was concentrating. He loved her courage and her determination to build a new life despite everything she had been through. But he did not know if she felt the same way, and he was afraid to ask. Their arrangement had been practical, not romantic. She might see him only as a protector, a means to an end. The thought of revealing his feelings and being rejected made him hold back, even as every day made it harder to keep his emotions hidden. Julia, for her part, was wrestling with her own confusion. When she had agreed to become a mail-order bride, she had expected duty, obligation, perhaps companionship if she was lucky. She had not expected to meet a man like Martha Reynolds. He was nothing like the men she had known in Boston, with their fancy manners and hidden cruelty. Martha was blunt and rough-edged, yes, but he was also kind and patient and honest in a way that made her feel safe for the first time in years, more than safe. She was starting to feel things she had thought herself incapable of feeling. When he smiled at her, rare though it was, her stomach fluttered. When he stood close to her, showing her how to mend a harness or check a horse's hooves, she was aware of his warmth and the solid strength of him. She found herself watching him when he thought she was not looking, admiring the easy way he moved, the competence with which he handled everything the ranch demanded. It terrified her. The last time she had been at the mercy of a man's affections, it had nearly cost her everything. But Martha was different. She knew that in her bones. And yet the fear remained, whispering that she was being foolish, that trusting any man was a mistake she would live to regret. The crisis came on a hot afternoon in July. Martha had ridden out to check on the cattle in the far pasture, leaving Julia alone at the ranch house. She was hanging laundry on the line when she saw the dust cloud on the road, riders approaching fast. Her heart seized with panic. She dropped the laundry and ran for the house. Grabbing the rifle Martha had taught her to use, 3 men reined up in front of the house, and she recognized them immediately as the type who made their living through violence. One was older, with a scarred face and dead eyes. The other 2 were younger but no less dangerous looking. They wore guns on their hips and carried themselves with the casual arrogance of men who were used to getting their way. The older man dismounted and walked toward the porch. "Afternoon, madam. We are looking for someone." "A woman from Boston, goes by the name Julia Edwards. You seen anyone like that around here?" Julia's hands tightened on the rifle, but she kept her voice steady. "Never heard of her." "That is funny," the man said, pulling a photograph from his pocket, "because you look an awful lot like her." Julia's blood ran cold. They had found her after all. "I think you are mistaken. My name is Julia Reynolds. I am married to the man who owns this ranch." "Reynolds, huh?" The man looked around, taking in the empty yard. "Where is this husband of yours?" "Out checking the cattle," Julia said. "He will be back any minute." "Maybe we will wait for him then," the man said, and his companions dismounted as well. "Have a little chat with him about his wife." "You are trespassing," Julia said, raising the rifle slightly. "I suggest you leave." The man laughed, a sound like gravel scraping on stone. "Put that down before you hurt yourself, sweetheart. We are not here to cause trouble. We just want to take you back to Boston where you belong. There are people there who want to talk to you about what happened to Edgar Thornton." "I am not going anywhere with you," Julia said, her finger moving to the trigger. "Leave now." "I am afraid we cannot do that," the man said, and nodded to his companions. "Boys." The 2 younger men started toward the porch, and Julia fired. The shot went high intentionally, but it made the men freeze. "The next one will not miss," she said coldly. "Get off this property or I will kill you where you stand." "You little witch," one of the younger men snarled, reaching for his gun. "I would not do that if I were you." Martha's voice rang out from behind them, and Julia felt a wave of relief so intense it made her dizzy. He was sitting on his horse about 20 yards away, his own rifle trained on the intruders. He must have heard the shot and come running. "This is private property," Martha said, his voice hard as iron. "The lady asked you to leave. I suggest you listen to her." The older man turned slowly, sizing up Martha. "This is none of your business, friend. We have legal authority to bring this woman back to Boston. She is wanted for murder." "She is my wife," Martha said flatly. "That makes it very much my business. And I do not see any badges on you, so legal authority is a stretch. You are bounty hunters, nothing more." "Bounty hunters with a valid warrant," the man said. "We can do this easy or hard. Your choice." "Here is my choice," Martha said, and fired. The bullet kicked up dirt right in front of the older man's boots, making him jump back. "Get back on your horses and ride out of here. Tell whoever hired you that Julia Reynolds is under my protection. If they want her, they will have to come through me, the sheriff, and every rancher in this county. And we do not take kindly to strangers trying to haul off our women on trumped-up charges. The Thornton family will not let this go," the older man said, his face reddening with anger. "Then the Thornton family can come out here and face me themselves," Martha said. "Now move, before I decide to stop being polite." For a tense moment, Julia thought the men might try something. but they saw the cold determination in Martha's eyes, saw that he was not bluffing, and slowly they backed toward their horses. The older man paused before mounting. "You are making a mistake," he said. "The Thorntons have long memories and deep pockets. They will keep sending men until they get what they want." "Let them," Martha said. "We will be waiting." The three men rode off, and Martha waited until they were out of sight before dismounting and walking over to where Julia stood on the porch. She was shaking now, the rifle drooping in her hands, and he gently took it from her. "Are you all right?" he asked. "I thought they would kill you," she whispered. "I thought I would lose you." "Hey," he said softly, and without thinking about it, he pulled her into his arms. She came willingly, burying her face against his chest, and he could feel her trembling. "I am fine. We are both fine. They are gone." "They will come back," Julia said, her voice muffled. He was right. "The Thorntons will not stop until they have me." "Then we will deal with it," Martha said firmly. He pulled back enough to look down at her, his hands on her shoulders. "I meant what I said. You are under my protection. I will not let anyone take you." "Why?" Julia asked, looking up at him with tears streaming down her face. "Why are you doing all this for me?" The words came out before he could stop them. "Because I love you." Julia froze, staring at him with wide eyes. "What?" "I love you," Martha repeated, and now that he had said it once, it was easier to say again. "I have loved you for weeks now. Maybe from the first moment I saw you step off that stage looking so scared and brave at the same time. I know this was not supposed to be that kind of marriage. I know you probably do not feel the same way. But when I saw those men threatening you, all I could think was that I would do anything to keep you safe. Anything." "Oh, Martha," Julia said, and she started crying harder. "You stubborn, wonderful fool, do you really not know?" "Know what?" "I love you too," she said, and stood on her toes to kiss him. It was not a practiced kiss, not elegant or refined. It was desperate and clumsy and perfect, full of all the fear and relief and love they had been holding back. Martha wrapped his arms around her and kissed her back with everything he had, pouring all his feelings into that single moment of connection. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Martha rested his forehead against hers. "I want to marry you," he said. "Really marry you. Not because of our arrangement, but because I cannot imagine my life without you in it." "Yes," Julia said without hesitation. "Yes, I will marry you. Tomorrow," Martha said. "I will ride into town first thing and bring back Reverend Thompson. I am not waiting any longer." Julia laughed, a sound of pure joy. "Tomorrow," she agreed. That night they sat up late making plans. Martha wanted to go to the sheriff in the morning as well, explain the situation, and make sure Julia had the protection of the law. Julia was hesitant, afraid that the sheriff might side with the bounty hunters, but Martha assured her that Sheriff Donovan was a good man who believed in justice. "Besides," Martha said, "once we are married, you will be a citizen of Oregon Territory. They cannot just drag you back to Boston without going through proper channels. And I will make sure every rancher and businessman in Pendleton knows you are my wife and under my protection. The Thorntons might have money, but out here, that does not count for as much as reputation." "I never imagined I could be this happy," Julia said, leaning against him on the porch steps. Above them, the stars were coming out, countless points of light in the vast darkness. "After everything that happened, I thought I would spend the rest of my life running and afraid. But with you, I feel like I can finally breathe again." "You never have to run again," Martha promised. "We will face whatever comes together." True to his word, Martha rode into Pendleton at dawn. He went first to the sheriff's office, where he laid out the whole story to Sheriff Donovan, a grizzled man in his 50s who had been keeping the peace in Pendleton for more than a decade. The sheriff listened carefully, his weathered face thoughtful. "That is quite a tale," he said when Martha finished. "But if what you say is true and it was self-defense, then she should not have to run." "That is what I told her," Martha said. "But those bounty hunters scared her. I need to know that you will back me up if they come back." "I will," Sheriff Donovan said firmly. "We do not hold with dragging innocent women off to face charges based on the word of rich folks back east who were not even there. But Reynolds, you should know that if they have a valid warrant, my hands might be tied." "The law is the law, even if I do not like it." "I understand," Martha said, "but until I see that warrant with my own eyes, she stays with me." "Fair enough," the sheriff agreed. "Bring her by sometime this week so I can get her statement on record. That way, if it does come to a trial, we will have her side of things documented." Martha's next stop was the church, where he found Reverend Thompson preparing for Sunday's service. The Reverend was a young man, only a few years older than Martha, with a kind face and genuine faith that shone through in everything he did. "Mr. Reynolds," he said, smiling, "what brings you to town so early?" "I need you to perform a wedding," Martha said. "Today, if possible." The Reverend's eyebrows rose. "Today? That is rather sudden." "I know," Martha said, "but I have been corresponding with a woman from back east, and she arrived a couple of months ago. We have been getting to know each other, and now we are ready to make it official." It was not quite a lie, more of a simplification of the truth. The Reverend did not need to know all the details. "Well, congratulations," Reverend Thompson said warmly. "I would be happy to perform the ceremony. Shall we say 2 o'clock this afternoon at your ranch?" "That would be perfect," Martha said, shaking the Reverend's hand. "Thank you." His final stop was the general store where he bought Julia a new dress. He was not sure of her exact size, but Mrs. Patterson, who ran the store, was good at guessing these things, and she helped him pick out a simple but pretty blue calico that would suit a wedding. He also bought a gold ring, plain but solid, the kind of ring that would last a lifetime. When he returned to the ranch, Julia was waiting anxiously on the porch. Her face lit up when she saw him, and he felt his heart swell with love for her. "It is all arranged," he said, dismounting and handing her the wrapped dress. "Reverend Thompson will be here at 2 o'clock. The sheriff knows the situation and has our backs, and I got you this." Julia unwrapped the dress and gasped. "Martha, it is beautiful." "Not as beautiful as you," he said, and meant it. "Go get ready. I need to wash up and make myself presentable." The ceremony was simple and brief, performed in the main room of the ranch house with only the Reverend present. Julia wore the blue dress and had woven wildflowers into her hair. Martha wore his best clothes, his hair slicked back and his boots polished. They stood before Reverend Thompson and spoke their vows, promising to love and honor each other for as long as they both lived, when the Reverend pronounced them husband and wife. Martha kissed Julia with all the tenderness he possessed, and he felt her smile against his lips. They were truly married now, bound together not by necessity but by choice and love. After the Reverend left, Julia turned to Martha with a shy smile. "So what happens now?" "Now," Martha said, pulling her close, "we start our life together, really together." That night, they consummated their marriage in Martha's bedroom, which was now their bedroom. It was Julia's first time, and Martha was patient and gentle, taking his time to make sure she felt safe and loved. Afterward, they lay tangled together in the darkness, Julia's head on his chest, listening to the steady beat of his heart. "I never thought I could trust a man again after Edgar," she said softly. "But you make me feel safe. You make me feel cherished." "You are cherished," Martha said, running his fingers through her loose hair. "Every day I wake up grateful that you came into my life." "Even though I brought trouble with me?" Julia asked. "Especially because of that," Martha said. "It takes courage to keep going when everything is against you." You could have given up, but you did not. That is the kind of strength I want beside me." They fell asleep like that, wrapped in each other's arms, and for the first time since she had killed Edgar Thornton, Julia slept without nightmares. The next few weeks were the happiest of Martha's life. He and Julia settled into married life with an ease that surprised them both. She was a partner in every sense of the word, working beside him on the ranch, offering ideas and suggestions that often improved how things were done. In the evenings, they would sit together and read or talk about their plans for the future, or simply enjoy each other's company in comfortable silence. They went into town together one Saturday, and Martha introduced Julia to everyone as his wife. The townspeople welcomed her warmly, the women especially excited to have another educated woman in their small community. Julia found herself invited to join the church ladies' auxiliary and the local reading circle, and she accepted both, grateful to be building a normal life. Sheriff Donovan took her statement about what had happened in Boston, writing it all down carefully and having her sign it. "I will send this to the territorial governor," he said. "Make sure it is on file. If those bounty hunters come back with a warrant, at least we will have your side of things ready to present." "Thank you," Julia said. "You have all been so kind. I expected judgment, not acceptance." "Out here, people understand that everyone has a past," the sheriff said kindly. "What matters is who you are now, and from what I can see, you are a good woman married to a good man. That is enough for most folks." Summer turned to fall, and the bounty hunters did not return. Julia began to hope that maybe they had given up, that the Thornton family had decided she was not worth the expense and trouble of pursuing her all the way to Oregon. She knew it was probably wishful thinking, but she allowed herself to believe it anyway. In September, she realized she was pregnant. She told Martha one evening after dinner, nervous about how he would react. They had not talked about children, and she was not sure if he wanted them, but Martha's face lit up with a joy so pure it brought tears to her eyes. "Really?" he asked, and when she nodded, he swept her into his arms and spun her around. "A baby. We are going to have a baby." "You are happy?" Julia asked, laughing and crying at the same time. "Happy does not begin to cover it," Martha said, setting her down gently and placing his hand on her still flat stomach. "You have given me everything I ever wanted, Julia. A home, a family, a reason to get up every morning. I could not ask for more." They began preparing for the baby's arrival, turning the small room Julia had first stayed in into a nursery. Martha built a cradle from oak wood, carving it with care, while Julia sewed tiny clothes and blankets. They argued playfully about names, Martha favoring traditional names while Julia wanted something more unique. "If it is a boy, we could name him after your father," Martha suggested one evening. Julia shook her head. "My father sold me to Edgar Thornton to pay his debts. I have no desire to name my son after him." "What about your mother then?" Martha asked gently. He knew Julia had loved her mother dearly. "Catherine," Julia said thoughtfully. "If it is a girl, we could name her Catherine, and if it is a boy, perhaps Michael." "Michael Reynolds," Martha said, testing it out. "I like it. It is strong." Winter came early that year, the snow falling thick and fast by late October. Martha made sure they were well stocked with supplies, knowing they might be snowed in for weeks at a time. He did not want Julia having to go without anything she needed, especially in her condition. It was during a particularly fierce snowstorm in December that trouble finally found them again. Martha was in the barn tending to the animals when he heard Julia scream from the house. He ran through the snow, his heart in his throat, and burst through the door to find the same 3 bounty hunters from before standing in his main room. The older one had his gun pointed at Julia, who stood by the fireplace, her hand protectively over her rounded belly. "Let her go," Martha said, his voice deadly quiet. "Not this time," the older man said. "We have been watching, waiting for the right moment, just you and her, all alone out here, nobody to interfere." "I will kill you if you touch her," Martha said, and it was not a threat but a simple statement of fact. "You are not in a position to make threats," one of the younger men said, stepping forward with his own gun drawn. "Put your hands up." Martha raised his hand slowly, his mind racing. The rifle was hanging by the door, too far to reach before they could shoot him. But Julia still had the pistol he had given her. He hoped she remembered where she had put it. "The Thorntons have gone through a lot of trouble to find you, Mrs. Reynolds," the older man said to Julia. "They want justice for their son. Can you blame them? Their son was a monster," Julia said, her voice shaking but determined. "He tried to force himself on me. I defended myself. That is not murder." "That is for a jury to decide," the man said. "Now come along quietly, and nobody has to get hurt." "She is not going anywhere with you," Martha said. "Then I guess someone is going to get hurt after all," the older man said, and turned his gun toward Martha. Julia moved faster than anyone expected. She grabbed the heavy iron skillet from where it sat by the fireplace and swung it with all her strength, hitting the older man in the side of the head. He went down hard, his gun firing harmlessly into the floor. The other two men turned toward her in surprise, and that moment of distraction was all Martha needed. He lunged forward, tackling the nearest man to the ground. They struggled for the gun, rolling across the floor, and then a shot rang out. The man went limp, blood spreading across his shirt. Martha looked up to see Julia standing there with the pistol in her hands, her face white as snow. The third man made a run for the door, clearly deciding this was not worth dying for. Martha let him go, more concerned about Julia than about catching a fleeing bounty hunter. He kicked the guns away from the two men on the floor, checking to make sure they were both dead or incapacitated, then went to his wife. "Julia," he said gently, taking the pistol from her trembling hands. "It is all right, you did what you had to do." "I killed him," she whispered. "I killed another man." "You saved my life," Martha corrected. "If you had not shot him, he would have killed me. You did the right thing." Julia looked at him with haunted eyes, then suddenly bent double, crying out in pain. Martha caught her as she sagged against him and felt his blood run cold when he saw the dark stain spreading across her skirt. "The baby," Julia gasped. "Something is wrong." Martha scooped her up and carried her to their bedroom, laying her gently on the bed. The stress and shock had brought on early labor, he realized with growing panic. It was too soon. The baby was not due for another 3 months. "I am going to get help," he said, but Julia grabbed his hand. "You cannot leave me," she said, terror in her voice. "Please do not leave me." Martha looked at her, at the blood and the pain in her eyes, and made a decision. He could not get to town and back before something terrible happened. He would have to deliver the baby himself. He had helped cows and horses give birth dozens of times, but this was different. This was his wife, his child. His hands were shaking as he gathered clean cloths and hot water, trying to remember everything he had ever learned about birthing. The labor was long and agonizing. Julia screamed and cried, and Martha held her hand and murmured encouragement even as he prayed desperately that she would survive this. The baby was too early, too small. What if it did not make it? What if Julia did not make it? But Julia was strong, stronger than she knew, and as dawn was breaking, a thin cry filled the room. Martha held his son in his hands, a tiny, fragile thing that fit in his palms, and felt tears streaming down his face. The baby was breathing, alive against all odds. "Is he all right?" Julia asked weakly. "He is perfect," Martha said, wrapping the baby carefully and placing him in Julia's arms. "Small but perfect. You did it, Julia. You brought our son into the world." Julia looked down at the tiny face and started to cry. "Michael," she said, "our little Michael." Martha knew the baby needed more help than he could provide. As soon as it was light enough, he rode to town through the snow, pushing his horse as fast as he dared, and returned with Dr. Brennan, a crusty old physician who had delivered half the babies in the county. The doctor examined both Julia and the baby with thorough care, then nodded approvingly. "You did well, Reynolds. Both of them are in better shape than I would have expected. The baby is small but strong. Keep him warm, make sure he is eating regularly, and he should be fine. As for your wife, she needs rest and care, but she will recover." Sheriff Donovan came out to the ranch the next day after the third bounty. Hunter made it back to town and reported what had happened. He examined the two bodies that Martha had wrapped in canvas and left in the barn, listened to both Martha and Julia's account of what had happened, and declared it a clear case of self-defense. "Those men had no legal authority to be here," the sheriff said. "No warrant, no badges. They were just hired guns trying to kidnap a woman from her own home. You had every right to defend yourselves." "What about the Thornton family?" Julia asked anxiously. "Will they send more men?" "I am going to send a telegram to the marshal in Boston," the sheriff said. "Lay out what happened here. Make it clear that any more attempts to take you will be met with legal action from this territory. The Thorntons might have money, but even they cannot ignore territorial law. And I suspect once they hear that 2 of their hired guns are dead, they will think twice about sending more." He was right. Over the following weeks, Martha and Julia heard nothing more from Boston. Finally, in early spring, a letter arrived from a lawyer representing the Thornton family. It stated that, in light of new evidence that had come to light regarding Edgar Thornton's character, the family was withdrawing their demand for Julia's extradition. The matter was considered closed. Julia cried when Martha read her the letter, tears of relief and joy. "It is really over," she said. "They are not going to come after me anymore." "It is over," Martha agreed, holding her and their son close. "You are free, Julia, truly free." Little Michael grew stronger every day, a fighter like his mother. By the time spring fully arrived, he was a healthy, chubby baby with his mother's green eyes and his father's stubborn chin. Martha had never known love like this, the fierce, protective love for a child, and it humbled him. Life settled into a new rhythm, busier now with a baby to care for but filled with small joys. Michael's first smile, his first laugh, the way he would grip Martha's finger with his tiny hand and hold on tight. Julia bloomed in motherhood, her happiness evident in everything she did. They worked together to make the ranch more prosperous, buying more cattle, planting crops, building on the foundation Martha had laid. Julia proved to have a head for business, keeping meticulous records and finding ways to save money and increase profits. Within a year, they were doing better financially than Martha had ever managed on his own. The town embraced them fully. Julia became known for her charity work, always ready to help a family in need or teach reading to children whose parents could not afford school. Martha earned respect as a fair dealer and a man of his word. They were no longer newcomers but valued members of the community. When Michael was 2 years old, Julia became pregnant again. This time, the pregnancy was smooth and uneventful, and in the fall of 1881 she gave birth to a healthy baby girl with auburn hair like her mother. They named her Catherine, after Julia's mother, and Michael was fascinated by his little sister, always wanting to help take care of her. "We have a good life," Julia said one evening as they sat on the porch watching the children play in the yard. Michael was 4 now, and Catherine was toddling after him with determined steps. "We do," Martha agreed, his arm around her shoulders. "Better than I ever imagined possible." "Do you ever regret it?" Julia asked. "Sending for a mail-order bride, you could have ended up with anyone." "I ended up with you," Martha said simply. "That is all that matters, and no, I do not regret it for a second. You are the best thing that ever happened to me." Julia leaned her head on his shoulder. "I love you, Martha Reynolds. Thank you for saying I was safe. Thank you for meaning it." "Always," Martha promised. "You will always be safe with me." The years passed peacefully. Michael grew into a serious boy who loved the ranch and the animals, often following his father around and asking endless questions. Catherine was more adventurous, always getting into mischief and exploring places she should not go. In 1884, Julia gave birth to twin boys, James and Thomas, who kept everyone busy with their energy and constant competition with each other. The ranch continued to prosper. Martha bought more land, expanding their holdings until they had one of the largest spreads in the county. Julia established a small school on their property, teaching not just their own children but those of the hired hands and neighboring families who lived too far from town to attend the public school. In 1887, when Michael was 8 and beginning to take on real responsibilities around the ranch, a visitor arrived from Boston. Julia tensed when she saw the well-dressed man step out of the hired carriage, but Martha squeezed her hand reassuringly. The man introduced himself as Christopher Edwards, Julia's younger brother. She had not seen him since she fled Boston 9 years earlier. "Julia," he said, his voice choked with emotion. "I have been trying to find you for years. Father died 2 years ago and Mother is not well. I needed to know you were all right." "I am more than all right," Julia said, gesturing to her family gathered around her. "I am happy. How did you find me?" "I hired detectives to trace the route the bounty hunters took. It led me here." Christopher looked at Martha. "You must be the man who protected her, the man she married." "I am," Martha said, shaking his hand. "Martha Reynolds." "Thank you," Christopher said sincerely, "for keeping my sister safe, for giving her a home when she had nowhere else to go." "She is my wife," Martha said. "It was not a burden." Christopher stayed for a week, getting to know his nephews and niece, hearing about Julia's life in Oregon. Before he left, he gave her a letter from their mother, asking for forgiveness and expressing joy that Julia had found happiness. "Will you come back to Boston?" Christopher asked. "Mother would love to see you again before she dies." Julia looked at Martha, who nodded. "We could make the trip," he said. "The children should meet their grandmother." So in the spring of 1888, the entire Reynolds family traveled to Boston by train, a journey that would have been unthinkable just 10 years earlier. Julia was nervous about returning to the city where she had killed a man, but she need not have worried. The Thornton scandal had faded into memory, replaced by newer gossip, and nobody seemed to recognize the fashionably dressed rancher's wife as the frightened fugitive who had fled so long ago. Julia's mother was overjoyed to see her and to meet her grandchildren. She was frail and weak, but her eyes lit up when Julia walked into the house, and they cried together, reconciling years of hurt and silence. "I am so sorry," her mother said. "I should have protected you from your father's schemes. I should have stopped him from promising you to that monster." "It is in the past," Julia said gently. "I forgave you long ago, and look what came from it. I have a wonderful husband and beautiful children. I am happy, Mother, truly happy." They stayed in Boston for 2 months, long enough for Julia's mother to spend time with her grandchildren, to see that Julia had indeed built a good life for herself. When they finally returned to Oregon, Julia felt a sense of peace she had not known she was missing. The last ghosts of her past had been laid to rest. The 1890s brought more changes and more growth. Michael, now a teenager, was tall and strong, every bit as capable as his father at running the ranch. Catherine, at 12, was still adventurous and had taken up riding like a boy, much to the scandalized delight of the townswomen. The twins were 10 and inseparable, always planning some scheme or another. In 1895, Julia surprised everyone by becoming pregnant again at 41. The pregnancy was difficult, and Dr. Brennan, now an old man himself, worried about her age. But Julia was determined, and in the late summer she gave birth to another girl whom they named Sarah. 5 children, Martha said, holding his youngest daughter and marveling at her tiny perfection. "We have been blessed beyond measure." "We have," Julia agreed, tired but glowing with happiness. "Who would have thought when I stepped off that stage in Pendleton, terrified and alone, that this would be my life?" "I knew," Martha said, smiling at her. "The moment I saw you, I knew you were going to change everything." The turn of the century found the Reynolds family firmly established as one of the most respected in the county. Michael, at 22, was preparing to take over more of the ranch operations, though Martha was still hale and active at 54. Catherine had shocked everyone by marrying a traveling photographer and moving to Portland, where she was establishing herself as a photographer in her own right. The twins were working the ranch alongside their father and brother, and Sarah, at 5, was the darling of the family, spoiled by her older siblings and doting parents. Julia was teaching at the school they had built, which had grown into a proper institution with 3 teachers and students from all over the county. She had written a book about her experiences, though she had changed the names and locations, and it had been published back east to modest success. The money from the book went into a scholarship fund for young women who wanted an education, but could not afford it. Martha and Julia celebrated their 22nd wedding anniversary in 1900, and the whole town turned out for the party. They renewed their vows in the church, surrounded by family and friends, and Martha looked at his wife, now 46 and more beautiful to him than ever, and felt his heart swell with love. 22 years, Julia said as they danced at the celebration afterward. "Sometimes it feels like just yesterday. Sometimes it feels like forever." "Forever is not long enough," Martha said, pulling her closer. "I would live 100 lifetimes with you if I could." "You old romantic," Julia teased, but her eyes were bright with tears. "I love you, Martha Reynolds." "Thank you for saving me." "You saved yourself," Martha said. "I just gave you a place to land." "We saved each other," Julia said, and kissed him while their children and grandchildren, for Michael had married and given them 2 grandchildren already, looked on and cheered. The years continued to pass, bringing joy and sorrow as all years do. Julia's mother passed away in 1903, and Christopher came to visit, bringing his own family. He had become a successful lawyer and had never forgotten how his sister's husband had protected her when she had nowhere else to turn. Martha's health began to decline in 1905, his joints stiff from years of hard work, his heart not as strong as it once was. But he was happy, surrounded by his children and grandchildren, secure in the knowledge that he had built something lasting. On a warm evening in June of 1908, Martha and Julia sat on the porch of their ranch house, just as they had done thousands of times before. Michael was running the ranch now, doing an excellent job of it, and Martha could finally rest. He was 62 and Julia was 54, and they had been married for 30 years. "You remember the day we met?" Martha asked, holding her hand. "Every detail," Julia said. "You were so serious, so nervous, and I was terrified." "You were the bravest person I had ever met," Martha said. "Coming all this way, facing down bounty hunters, starting a whole new life. I admired that from the very beginning." "I could not have done it without you," Julia said. "You gave me courage. You made me believe I deserved to be happy." "You did," Martha said. "You do. And I hope you know that every day of these 30 years has been a gift. You are the love of my life, Julia Reynolds." "And you are mine," Julia said, tears streaming down her face. "Forever and always." They sat there as the sun set, painting the sky in shades of gold and crimson, and Martha felt a deep peace settle over him. He had lived a good life, a full life, and he had no regrets. He had taken a chance on a mail-order bride who was running from the law, and she had given him everything he had ever wanted, and so much more. Martha passed away peacefully in his sleep that night, Julia beside him holding his hand. At his funeral, the whole town came to pay their respects, and person after person spoke about what a good man he had been, how he had helped them in their time of need, how he had always kept his word. Julia mourned him deeply, but without bitterness. She had been blessed with 30 years of love and partnership, and she carried that love with her through the rest of her days. She lived to be 82, long enough to see her great-grandchildren born, to see the ranch continue to prosper under Michael's capable management, to see Catherine's photographs displayed in galleries across the West. When she finally passed away in 1932, she was buried beside Martha on the hill overlooking the ranch, under a stone that read, "Julia Edwards Reynolds. Wife, mother, teacher, friend. She came to Oregon seeking safety and found love instead." Their descendants continued to work the ranch for generations, and the story of how Martha Reynolds had taken in a fugitive mail-order bride and protected her against all odds became family legend, passed down from parent to child. It was a story about courage and love, about second chances, and the power of choosing to trust when everything told you not to. And on warm summer evenings, when the sun set over the blue mountains and painted the sky in gold, people said you could sometimes see two figures sitting on the porch of the old ranch house, holding hands and watching the land they had built together. Whether it was true or just a romantic fancy, nobody could say for sure. But the love that Martha and Julia had shared was real and enduring as the land itself, and that was something no amount of time could ever diminish. Their love story had begun with fear and desperation, with a woman fleeing from the law and a lonely rancher taking a chance on a stranger. But it had become something beautiful and lasting, a testament to the power of love to heal and transform. Julia had confessed that she was running from the law, and Martha had said she was safe now. And he had meant it, with everything in him. That promise had been the foundation of a life built together, a family raised with love, and a legacy that would endure for generations. It was a love story for the ages, set against the wild and beautiful backdrop of the Old West, and it proved that sometimes the best things in life come from the most unexpected places, that sometimes running away is really running toward something better, and that true love, when you find it, is worth any risk, any sacrifice, any challenge. In the end, that was the lesson their story taught, that love is not about perfect circumstances or easy choices, but about finding someone who makes you feel safe enough to be yourself, brave enough to face your fears, and strong enough to build a future together, no matter what obstacles stand in your way. Martha and Julia had found that in each other, and in doing so, they had created something that would last far beyond their own lifetimes, a love that would echo through the years, and inspire everyone who heard their story to believe that happy endings are possible, even in the wildest of places.